Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah, and this is Medicated Housewife DIY, where crafting and mental health come together. In today's DIY video, we are making this jaw-dropping Dollar Tree tumbling tower block wood display planter. It's a quick and easy and truly unique piece of gorgeous home decor made out of Dollar Tree tumbling tower blocks and one Dollar Tree foam board. So you're gonna wanna grab your Dollar Tree Jenga blocks or tumbling tower blocks. I'm excited and you should be too. So let's go make some stuff and jump right into this. To begin with, I used just over 4 boxes, and that's the big 72 block box of tumbling tower blocks for this project. It's a total of 296 blocks, and the display planter is 37 rows long, which works out to be almost 2 feet long. It's a very big statement piece of decor, but it's gorgeous. First, I glued together 2 blocks end to end, and I'm using Titebond wood glue, and I'll link that for you in the description box below. I make 148 of these 2 block sets. Next, I take my 148 2 block sets and I glue one set on top of another. So I'm making 4 block sets out of them. I'm going to use all 148 of the 2 block sets, and I will end up with 74 sets of 4 blocks. Sounds complicated. It's not at all. Just watch what I'm doing. These 4 block sets are what I'm going to be building the display planter with. So initially I thought I'd use a combination of hot glue and wood glue to build this, but I learned pretty quickly that the hot glue was not going to work for me. I just don't seem to have too much luck using hot glue with my Jenga blocks. I don't know about you, but it rarely works for me. But I wanted that hot glue to help give me an immediate hold, since the wood glue takes a while to set up. So instead, I just needed to be really patient and allow some drying time throughout the entire process. You will see what I mean. But for this first row, I take 2 of the 4 block sets and I glue them together end to end. That is going to be row number 1. Beginning on the second row, I take a 4 block set, which we will refer to as just a set of blocks from now on, since all the sets are 4 block sets. I take a set of blocks and I want to glue it about a half of the width of the set upwards from the set underneath it. And I use some spare Jenga blocks as placeholders to hold the block sets in place as the wood glue dries. And you will see I use a lot of spare blocks to hold these rows in place while they dry. After I glue the first side down, I then glue the other side the exact same way. I'm doing this on an angle, headed upward about a half width of the block set underneath it, using more spare blocks to hold this second row in place as I go. The third row and fourth row are more of the same, and each row angles upwards slightly more than the row before it. I'm going to use as many spare Jenga blocks under the rows as is necessary to support the rows as they dry. And also, I want to point out that I'm doing my best to line up the outer ends of all of my rows with each other to try and keep them in as much of a straight line as possible as we add more and more rows. I do give the first 4 rows a little time to fully dry before continuing, and you will see that I do this several times throughout this DIY because there are so many angles on this, and if the glue is wet, the support for each row just isn't going to be there, if that makes any sense. So patience is really key here. Fifth row is more of the same. It's an upward angle and we're gluing one side and then we glue the other. And we're piling up spare blocks underneath the row as needed. The 6th row, we start to get a little more extreme with the upward angle. And now we start to angle each row upward, lining up the bottom edge of our set that we're going to be gluing to meet the top edge of the row before it, the one that we are gluing it to. This is where our design really starts to take shape as our rows start to really twist and turn. I just love the design of this, and I think you will too. It is so interesting to look at. The 7th row keeps the angles moving upwards, and as you can see, my pile of multicolored spare Jenga blocks is also growing upwards, and these piles of blocks are not the neatest or the prettiest, but they do get the job done and they do help support the rows. The 8th row angles up even further as we are getting closer to it being totally upright. The 9th row getting even closer to upright. Rows 10 and 11 don't really require extra blocks to hold them up because they're pretty much straight up and down. I gave my first 11 rows a couple of hours to dry before continuing. At this point, our rows will begin angling downward and out instead of upward and in. I'm using my extra Jenga blocks mostly on the outside of the rows at this point. As we continue with each consecutive row, we're angling more and more outwards, as you can see here. I'm actually surprised at just how many of these spare colorful Jenga blocks I have lying around. These are all leftover blocks from projects that I've done in the past, and I usually just toss them into a container and I forget about them, unless I can figure out something fun to do with them in the future. And let me know in the comments if you have any ideas that we utilize Jenga blocks of multiple colors and finishes. I am open to any and all of your ideas. We're gonna keep going the same way, and I'll speed this up pretty quickly until we get to the middle of the project, and our middle row is going to be lying flat, and that is when our direction will start to shift once again. So with our middle row lying flat, we begin gluing and angling our rows upward again, this time toward the center. I am starting the angle at about a half a width upwards, like we did at the beginning, and eventually I will make that angle more extreme by lining up the next row bottom edge with the previous row's top edge. And we're continuing to advance that angle upwards until we reach the point where our row is standing straight up and does not require any of the Jenga blocks, the loose Jenga blocks to support it, because it stands on its own. And just a note, there is no definitive row number of where you need to begin making that angle more extreme. As long as your angle is going in the right direction and you continue that direction on each consecutive row, you will end up with your rows in the right position. It is so much easier than it sounds, but truly the rows of blocks pretty much guide the way for you. I glue the remaining rows angling downward, and they're going toward the center. And I keep them angling more and more in that direction until I get to my final row, which is going to be flat, and that is how I know I've come to the end. When I got close to the end, I was a little afraid that my end flat row wasn't going to fit perfectly, so I decided to stop there and make the final 4 rows separately and then attach that whole piece to the rest of the project. So I began with my 2 sets of blocks glued end to end flat, and then the next row after that I angled upwards, and the row after that one angled upwards more, and then another row angled upwards even more. I then gave that piece some time to dry, and once it dried off camera, I simply glued that to the rest of the project, and it ended up fitting just fine. I let the entire piece dry overnight, and then I grabbed some stain, and I'm using the Varathane wood stain in the color Early American. I'll link it for you below because I didn't want the brown to be too warm or too golden. I wanted more of a cool toned color. So I stained the entire piece, and just understand that this display planter is very large. It's about 8 inches wide and close to 2 feet long, so there's a lot of ground to cover when staining. I start with the front and the top and all the little nooks and crannies that I can see, and then I flip it over and stain what I can see and turn it around. Basically, I stain it inside, outside, and all around. I use a dry paper towel to wipe off all of the excess stain that I can see, and then I set the whole thing aside to dry completely. When my stain dries, I take my Waverly White chalk paint and I mix it with a little brown acrylic paint and a drop or two of black acrylic paint just to darken it a bit. I am using a thin, dry brush to roughly brush that beigey color that I created over the edges and the corners and a little in the middle of the block sets to create a naturally distressed effect. And I added more distressing wherever I thought that it needed it, and then I put that aside to fully dry. I needed to create a bottom for this display planter, and it had to be strong enough to fully support the weight of all the blocks. So I ended up using a foam board that I got from Dollar Tree. I cut that in half and then traced out the planter on it. I cut 2 pieces of the board to that size with an X-Acto knife, and I glued them together using some hot glue. The 2 boards glued together made a very strong and supportive bottom. I then took some Waverly Antique wax and I used it to paint the entire foam board, especially the edges, which are a dead giveaway that you used foam board, so make sure you paint those edges well. You could also tape the edges with some paper masking tape before you're painting. So also that will conceal the fact that you're using foam board, and that's a helpful hint from me. So I paint it with the antique wax, and once that's dried, I take some of that beigey acrylic color that I created earlier, and using a dry brush, I distress the board so that it looks like real distressed wood and it matches the wood tumbling tower blocks. And all that's left to do is to use some hot glue to glue the blocks to the foam board. And this is how my jaw-dropping Jenga Block wood display planter turned out. This is one of the most interesting Jenga Block DIYs I've ever made. I really think this pattern and the wavy kind of zigzaggy edges of this piece is just so cool. This, as a decor piece, just speaks to me. I personally have never seen a tumbling tower block project similar to this. And like my Jenga Block bowl from last year, which if you have not seen that video, I will leave a link for it in the description box below. So like that bowl, I feel like this styling of the blocks has lots of versatility to it. I think I may be doing some other decor items in the future using this pattern for the blocks. That's just a hunch. This particular piece, I think, also has so many possibilities for uses. I'm calling it a display planter, but I also think this would make a phenomenal tray, like truly unique. I'm picturing this as a centerpiece on a table runner that's on a long rectangular table. I'm just chock full of ideas when I look at this piece. It really inspires my creativity. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you love this display planter as much as I do? Would you want it on display in your home with your decor? Do you see some other possibilities for this pattern of tumbling tower blocks? What are some of your ideas? Let me know in the comments all of your ideas and how you feel about this Jenga Block wood display planter. Your thoughts on this are really important to me, truly. I hope you enjoyed this Medicated Housewife DIY, and if you did, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing. It really helps out my channel. Once again, thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm the Medicated Housewife, and crafting is my medication.